Welcome back to the Outer Circle Inner Stillness discussion platform for sobriety, spirituality, and relationships, things that come along with that. I am Rhys back here with Thaddeus Patrick, and we are bringing more ideas to you about topics that are very dear to our hearts, and hope you have some thoughts back for us. Indeed. Thaddeus, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty well, all things considered.
Good. And what are you up to these days in your practice and in your life?
I am working on, as think I've mentioned before, my men's coaching program with another Orthodox coach, and so he's focused on the practical life coaching skills, habits. I'm focused on the psychological and spiritual side, understanding yourself and traumas and whatnot. And between the two of us, hopefully it'll be a pretty holistic program. So I'm very excited for that. Hopefully by the end of this year, it will be started up and running.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And I'm really interested in this, and also suddenly wanted to pitch it a little bit because it's probably going to be valuable. But can you say a little bit more, like who would be like an ideal group member for this?
Yeah, anyone who has some degree of interest in Christianity and especially Orthodoxy. We're definitely open, even though it's an Orthodox men's coaching program, and it will be steeped in Orthodoxy. I'm sure we'll have lots of Protestant and Catholic participants, and the always forgotten, and I feel bad for them, the Oriental Orthodox, who are kind of the fourth big Christian group. I'm sure some people from that circle will be in our program. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a handful of people who are not Christian at all, who are just like, I'm interested in this perspective. But it will be for any men who, one, want to have a deeper understanding of themselves. And what we have is we have two curriculums. The first curriculum is my section. And the way I kind of explain it is it's focused on the universal mission of all human beings. So all of us are on this earth for a reason, to live a life of repentance, which doesn't mean simply like, oh, God, don't punish me for bad things I did. But it means to turn our hearts to Christ and turn our hearts to virtue and turn our hearts to healing and peace. That's one of my favorite words. Is I think all human beings deep down, we want peace. And I know that the more I find peace in my life, even amidst struggles, the more I have an inner peace, inner stillness, it makes all the difference. So you could say that the group is about finding stillness in all of life. And then Ilya, who is my partner in crime, his section, I like to sum it up as your personal mission. So if my section is focused on the universal mission and the passions, as we Orthodox call them, which I would argue addictions, codependency, these sorts of things are forms of passions where we have a valid desire, and then we are so used to fulfilling it in our own way and through our own means, and it doesn't really work. And we go back to that because it's the nicest thing we know. This is all things that you're very good at diving much deeper into, but approaching that with a spiritual perspective is my focus. And then his focus is, what are you, specifically you, put on this earth to do? That's different from the next person who's living the same spiritual life that I am. And yet in our everyday life, we're two different people with different giftings, different parts of the body. So it will be a balance between the universal mission that all humans have and your personal mission and your personal habits, and structuring your life in a way that brings about the best results for you specifically. So yeah, anyone who that sounds appealing to is welcome to join. We recently chose our patron Orthodox saint, which will be Father Seraphim Rose. And Ilya came up with the idea of using the word council in the name. So we're officially going to be called the Rose Council, which I'm very excited about. It's a both masculine and nurturing kind of name. So the website, which isn't up yet, but will hopefully be up by the end of the year, will be rosecouncil.com. So yeah, so I'm pretty excited for that.
Yeah. That sounds really, really delightful. And the Rose Council, yeah, that does have this really nice mix blend of something kind of graceful, kind of gentle, but also really I know really strong too. So yes. Technical note: if anybody's watching, looks like we do have a little bit of a lag going on, which is sometimes expected when we're talking across states, but we'll push through it. But yeah, I love that, and I love the idea of this balance of looking for universal purpose combined with individual purpose. Those pairings, they seem to cover a lot, like that kind of the balance between like what's my task priority for right now, this moment, combined with what's my long-term vision, for example. So that you guys are working both of those together, it sounds like a really, really useful undertaking. And yeah, any chance to reference Father Seraphim Rose is great as well. So that's just really wonderful.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of looking for the links between what I might call the micro and macro. And I think that that's a sign that you've found something that's very true when you can see the parallels between the furthest circles out, politics and things going on in the world, and then my own community, my own family, and then myself and my own heart. And I can see when some people will focus a lot on politics and be really obsessive over politics in a way that the rest of us can kind of tell it's a little too much, and yet there's truth to what they're saying. And some of us will avoid knowing anything about what's going on in the world, which I think often is a good option. But I think there is this way of looking at the world and the spiritual forces that push things and seeing ourselves in it. Because from the Orthodox perspective, the main idea behind spiritual warfare, and I think this links to so many different mental disorders and struggles all of us are going through, is what I already referenced earlier, this idea that I have this part of me that rises up and attempts to be my own savior and protect myself. And the demonic forces, from the Orthodox perspective, are these entities that want to justify themselves, and they want to attack people by not like necessarily like in horror movies and stuff, but by encouraging us towards our own godhood. In the same way that if I think I'm right, other people agreeing with me makes me feel better about myself. They are ego. And when they have us choose this path of independence and self-saving that they do, it makes them feel better. Like, yeah, I knew I was right all along. These humans agree with me. So when you expand, that's what I'm struggling with every day in my own life, is wrestling with this part of myself that wants to be my own God, that gets defensive, that is an addict and goes towards things to please myself as temporary solutions. But when you expand that out and you look at politics, you see the same spirit of humans can save themselves. And humans, if we're more politically right or left or whatever it is, if we're more capitalist or communist, this is the thing that's going to save us. And if only everyone else wouldn't oppose that,
right,
safe. But deep down, it comes down to me. Like the problem in every situation, whatever system you have, the ultimate problem is us. Like,
yeah,
I value my judgment most, my pleasure most, me most, and I'm defensive if anyone threatens that. So
yeah, that feels like one of those other like divine balances of like the micro and macro. So I'm thinking in the internal family systems framework that I really like for a lot of counseling purposes, there can be this very individual centric approach to it, regarding, rightly so, there's a lot of power in the individual, and they have like this clinical language for talking about the image of God in a person and the divine essence of God that is implanted in every person. And in practice we discovered there's a whole lot of power in accessing that, and there's a lot that the individual can do within themselves, just tapping into like the huge amount of potential of the human person. But as I've been with this a little bit more, I'm beginning to recognize that there is also a limit to that too, because we are individuals that are really powerful, but we're also meant to be in connection and community with others. And so I think the balance you're hinting at there is maybe the balance between how much do I save myself and how much do I need to be saved, or what is my responsibility to amend, fix, adjust within myself versus when do I actually need actual other humans, and what does need to just, flat out come from divine intervention. Because it seems like you can't just put a blanket statement on all of that. Every person's different. Every situation is a little bit different. And the way that God works too, and I think this is Orthodox thought as well, is it's synergistically. I think we regard our salvation process as this collaboration between us and God. Not an equal collaboration by any means. It's we supply the willingness and the showing up, and God supplies all of the power and the dynamism. But yeah, there's that balance though of like, I can't save myself, but I do need to participate in it, and God does do a lot, but also like He's not going to force me. So
yeah. There's something I'm really fascinated by, and I talk about this a little bit in the curriculum for the men's group, is one of the things we have to keep in balance, and I think there is at least a good starting place for this, but there's sometimes this emphasis, especially in American culture and the modern Western world, on the individual, the radical individualism, the divine individualist, Jordan Peterson would say. The founding fathers were of this mindset. Writers like Thoreau and Emerson were very much emphasizing this radical individual self and going out into the woods and isolating yourself in a way. And we can tell that even though there's something true about that, there's something concerning about that. And the other end is the radical collective. And that's everything from the socialism and communism in some of its just most extreme forms, or things like Hinduism, saying we're all actually one. We just are under this illusion that we're separated into parts. And so we're actually one consciousness. And I think the Orthodox answer, and I would argue very strongly the therapeutic answer, I think a lot of secular sources and secular research outside Christianity affirms this. But the answer, from my perspective, is that we are individuals, and anything that violates that is not good for us. Like forcing people to enter into sexuality, like the value of consent, or God making us be good. These would be very problematic things. And yet at the same time, we thrive when we're not focused on our individualism. Like that's something that we protect, but it only finds its purpose when it's used for the well-being of others. And I think a lot of times when we will think we're thinking about others, and we lack some of the insight to see we're actually doing something that's deep down spiritually, it's for us. Like we're trying to please someone else, and we think that's being nice. But there's a lot of tests for when something is real love. And ultimately, the Orthodox view is that the fullness of real love is a divine attribute. It comes from Christ himself. So it's not something we just do as an action, or we can will ourselves to be sacrificial for others. We can a little bit, but not enough. So there's this in between that can be summed up as the individual is a necessary component that has to be protected. And at the same time, the individual suffers and is malnourished and dies if they're not using their individuality for the true well-being of others. So that's, for me, that's kind of the spot where I try and land in my own life and how I guide people in my own coaching practice.
Yeah. I hear that as a really beautiful articulation of this really complex balance of we are individuals, but we're a collective, not a monolith. But yeah, I mean, if I say anything more, I'll be trying to just say what you already said really, really beautifully. I wonder though about maybe I'll use that as a segue into our actual topic for today. But we wanted to talk about making amends and talking about being honest, which I mean, I think it fits though. I mean, we're talking about how do we be good individuals, and how do we be good individuals in community with others, and how we be honest, how we make amends. I think would definitely fit into that. So you were talking about the individual not being so focused on the individual, or how did you say it? If I as an individual am only focused on my individual experience, my individual needs, and not in your needs or at the expense of your needs, like that's an imbalance. and that's unhealthy. So an example of this that can come up in sobriety conversation is this idea of making amends. That term shows up in the 12 steps for sure. This idea of, as part of the growth process, part of the sobriety process, we make amends with those we have hurt, except in cases where to do so would cause harm. The wording is something like that. Rough paraphrase. But there's this idea of, we've caused damage, we've caused harm, now we need to repair it. But there is often this question of, okay, so is this effort more for me or more for the other person? Recognizing there are some ways I could go about it that would be harmful to the other person, and in some situations where that would be harmful. But then, I guess that's this question of, do I make amends for my benefit or for the other person's benefit? And I'd be curious, what are some of your thoughts about that? I guess also when we're talking about amends, that's 12-step language for sure. But in more counseling context, we might talk about like conflict resolution. We might talk about relationship repair following a rupture. I think in Orthodoxy, we would just talk about, forgiveness and things like that. What's your thought?
When someone comes to me in my practice and has questions about conflicts, maybe a spouse that's doing something that's really annoying them or whatever it is, there's a model I introduce them to, and maybe I should name it or something, or label it, systematize it more. But basically, I always say the world has basically two standards. Kind of secular culture has this standard of justice, which is like this flat line where you went according to the law, you didn't break any boundaries, you respected everyone else's boundaries. And then below that is injustice, where I took things I'm not owed and I harmed someone and all of these things. And these are good concepts. These are very helpful. So there's this justice line, and then there's this below line where you go down into injustice. And so a lot of times when we value consent, we're kind of like, hey, just don't violate anyone else's boundaries. But for Christianity, we actually have a higher path. We value justice. We value not violating these lines and boundaries that other people have and that God establishes. But we have this higher path. And this higher path is the path of the cross, the path of sacrifice, a path that is to some degree foolishness to the world, even though we all know that the greatest heroes are the ones that are sacrificial. And there's a lot of research that says people, like I was pointing at earlier, that live for other people are the ones who die happier on their deathbed. And the ones who are very selfish lives of bitterness and self-centrism die not at peace a lot of the time. And so I'll try and keep it brief, but the reason for this higher path is because living for ourselves and this tendency we have towards sin, which Orthodoxy treats more like an illness, like we have this proclivity towards ourselves, it's warred with by taking this higher path, by taking the path of the cross, not always getting what we want and having other people's needs come before what we're craving in that moment. But there's another factor that comes into this, because a lot of people ask, okay, so do we just suffer as much as possible? We let people run over us and do whatever they want. And we just keep apologizing over and over. Is that amends? There's this other factor that comes in to the sacrificial love, and that is the aspect of humility. And humility is the word for not being in this state of totally relying on ourselves. So this is what's going on in a lot of people pleasing. This is a subject I'm, as a people pleaser myself, and I'm friends with a lot of nice people, not truly loving, but we're nice at times. This is a subject I'm very interested in, but we don't realize that sometimes this way of going and apologizing to someone is actually for us. And it's actually a way we keep control. And I've been through this in the past many times where I was like, what apology do I have to say that they'll like not be mad at me anymore and come back? And the reality is that's not actually love. That's not actually sacrificial. So it's a lot of things I could say about this, but basically it's good for us to recognize our limits. Like that's part of the process of coming to the point where we can actually have real love that comes from God is to recognize our limits. So on one hand, it's good to always be desiring and pursuing this sacrificial path, but we'll reach this point where we realize I can't do it. Maybe my spouse keeps leaving this one piece of laundry out in a spot I don't like. And I've tried to say, I'm just going to take up my cross. I'm just going to pray when it happens and thank God for it. These common Orthodox methods, which are the right place to start. But at some point you're like, I'm going to explode at them. I'm going to take this lower path and I'm going to be unjust to them and just be really mean over this small thing. And that's where our act of love is, to just take this path. So we'll say, okay, I need to sit down. I need to have a talk with them, or I need to apologize for what I've done. Like whatever those negotiating steps are, we take those steps. So we shoot towards the sacrificial path. But when we recognize our limits and that I'm no saint, like I'm going to lose it, we just fight not to do an injustice and we fight to go here. So for the world, this is the high bar. And for us Christians, this is the low bar. Like this is where I'm settling. But I think recognizing that we want to shoot to be sacrificial in a way that is an actual challenge to us, not people pleasing, not one of these pseudo loves, but the real deal. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times we are just shooting for that just level. But I think when the world approaches it, that's just like, well, I owe them this and I owe them this and I'm going to do that. And that's all I'm going to do. And for us, we're like, that's where we start. Like we want to make amends because that's the beginning, not because that's the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking at amends as the beginning of what will then be a nurturing relationship, or and here's where we get to our idea of, is amends just like a one-time thing, or is it a practice? Because like if there's like here's a specific breach, you lost my socks, there could be a specific confrontation and a specific repairing of that. But I think what you're talking about is you kind of going beyond that to say, so I'm not just apologizing to you, but I'm also caring for you now, or I have to do it in a way that sets up our relationship to still be like a good, healthy, and safe place there. So not just this, oh, I'm sorry I did this terrible thing to you. Now you have to think about it again, and I haven't actually done anything or changed anything. But more of a taking ownership, and more of and how do I help you heal from this also? Or I think it's an idea that shows up in more of like the restorative justice. It's not so much like what rule was broken and who broke it and how do we punish them. It's more of like, well, who was hurt and what do they need, and who should give it. Yeah. There's a way to, or so in here's my parenthetical tangent. I don't think just saying I'm sorry is ever good enough. Like that's a phrase that should probably be like taken out of our vocabulary, just because it's so meaningless. I'm sorry I did this thing. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean you're changing? Does that mean you're sad? Does that mean, what does that mean? Much better to use language like, I know I hurt you when I did this thing. There's taking ownership, there's acknowledgement, acknowledging, well, here's, I did this thing, but that's the confession. I know it hurts you this way. I know if it affects you this way. That's good. And then, asking for forgiveness, asking, can we come back together? Maybe even the two asking, well, what do you need from me to be better, to be more okay, to come back to your own sense of being ordered. And I think language and attitude more like that maybe sets us up more for that reconciliation work that's really about the other, or at least about the relationship, because it doesn't have to be like only good for the other, but something like, how do I now help you, keeps us in relationship, keeps us working together. And I think that, that I would think that is more in line with what you're talking about, is more of a higher calling, is promoting more peace, promoting more goodness, wellness for everyone. What's your thought?
Yeah, I think, and this is part of why I have a hard time doing any psychology that isn't integrative with my own spiritual tradition. But what we're ultimately talking about is this ultimate divine sacrificial love. And to some degree, it's beyond language, because I believe that the fabric of the universe, like, this is what it birthed out of, was this divine attribute of love. But the closest I could come to like putting words on it from my own study and experience, and who I've encountered in Christ and his saints and the Orthodox Church, is that love is a readiness to sacrifice for the well-being and beauty of the other person. Like, something in me is truly driven by the well-being and beauty of someone else. And to be honest, that's like so rarely the case for me. I think it is for a lot of us, but at least for me, like, a lot of the time I think I'm being loving, and I search my heart and I'm like, oh gosh, I have so many bad motives going on. And I think this is why I believe we need the divine and outside help, because it's him in us that is the fullness of us unconditionally living for the beauty of others. We see this at the cross, when Christ is on the cross and he's had the worst of all injustices done to him. He's wronged no one, and they murder him and spit on him. And he looks at them and he goes, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." And his only mind is on our well-being. And even if he allows difficulties and he punishes, it's not retribution. It's not, I got to pay you back for what you did, which is what we do when we are not like him. It's always for our well-being. And if it's not going to help us to punish us, he doesn't punish us. He's always doing what brings us to the place that we can participate in this love. But the inverse of this is doing all the external forms of love and not having that heart. And we see, narcissists that apologize and all of these different actions that on the surface look very loving, and inside they're calculating. And I see sometimes when I see my clients are in a relationship, or some of my friends, and there's a conflict, and one of them will be like, I'll do anything. I'll do what you want. I'm so sorry, etc. And the other one is still unhappy with them. And I've encountered a couple of these situations where at first I'm like, wow, why won't the person forgive them? Why won't they see how hard they're trying? But after a while, you realize that the other person can tell that this desperation and apology, they don't even know how to explain it, but they can tell it's not real love.
Mm-hmm.
That they're not being loved, they're being addicted to.
Mm-hmm.
They're being objectified. And the other person wants this high and this security and the safety that they get from the person. So they're desperate. I'll apologize. I'll do whatever. But it's not the same as truly loving them for their own sake. Mm-hmm. And so I think all of us perceive this. But I think the first layer is that this is real love, like over here. So if I say, I'm sorry, well, apologizing is part of real love, but we can do this over here without real love. But I think if we find we don't have real love, which is most of the time for me, like I'm doing these external actions, the important thing is that if we don't want to actually love, and I say this to my clients all the time, we want to love. We say, I wish I had love and I desire to have love. And especially for us Orthodox Christians, we ask God for that. This is the practice, is I do something like, Lord, I'm going to apologize to this person because I know it's the right thing. But I recognize I have this emptiness in my apology and that my heart is still hard. But something in me is sad about this. So there's still something that wants goodness. There's still the glimmer of the light of God in me to some degree. Yeah. So Lord, I'm going to do the loving act, and I'm going to ask that you use it to make me loving, even though I admit it's not. And I think this is the in-between between knowing I'm not here, but knowing I shouldn't be here, where it's like fake and empty and manipulative. The in-between is this place where we do what we can and we call on help. And that is what moves us towards the real love. And that is the method that like the Orthodox saints give us, is this simple, peaceful, but self-honest path that moves us in little steps towards the divine and towards real love. And people can feel if we don't at least have this, they can tell that they're being used and objectified.
I really want to emphasize what you're saying, that the person, the recipient of this, is going to be able to tell is this genuine or not. And there's spiritual dynamics going on there, those who are in tune with the spiritual world. And there's also neurophysiological dynamics going on as well, going back to attachment science and attunement. We're able to perceive when someone is connecting with us with their left brain like logical, linear, intellectual, versus a more right brain, a more embodied, emotional, attuned, sort of energy. It's that right brain connection that's so connected to the body that, especially in infancy and young childhood, helps us develop a sense of self and a sense of my existence is okay. Our relationship is secure, so I'm okay in that, and that persists, I think, into adulthood. We if we watch for it, we'll have a sense for, oh, this person really gets me. I feel felt by this person, and there's usually going to be some tells of, like, I mean, eye contact is probably going to be a thing. Like watching their face kind of mirrors the content of what I'm doing. Maybe their body like inclines toward me rather than away or anything. And their comments might be a little bit more like kind of participating in my experience with me, not trying to fix it, not trying to solve it, definitely not criticizing or dismissing it. But that is something what we're going to be aware of. And so in what you're saying, I think there's a couple important shifts to consider if we want to begin to do these things better. Your example, here's this person apologizing, saying something like, oh, what do you need? I'll do anything. I'll do anything. Yeah, there's kind of a self-serving component there, kind of a controlling component. I want to control the situation. I want to control your reactions, your experience, so as to control what I feel. And that's not sincere. That's not, well, I'm sure it's sincerely trying to do something, but it's not connective and it's not healing. And there I want to emphasize the shift from doing to being. I think a better alternative would then, oh, I'll do anything. What do you need me to do? Would be, would you like to say more about what you're feeling? Or can I, or just say, can I be with you? Or like, is there more you need me to know about your experience? And that might then lead to, can you also do something? But it could also lead to, no, actually, I need to tell you another story or something, or I need you to just kind of be with me. But that shift from doing to being is going to be the more connective one. And I think with that is the second shift from, like we're talking about, sometimes we'll do this apology, do this amends gesture to try to control a situation. But if it is truly sacrificial and if it is truly caring for the other person, then we're relinquishing control. Where, I say, I'm acknowledging I did this thing. It impacted you this way. Would you like to say more about that? Would you, what do you need? Is putting me in a position where I now need to trust. And so that might be the other major shift, is shifting from a position of how do I control you to how do I now trust you, which I think if practiced would lead to the other person being able to trust you back. I think those are the shifts we really need to consider when we're looking at making amends and repairing and doing it well, is, these more presence oriented, loving, compassionate, sacrificial, being with the person, trusting them, rather than trying to do unto them and control them and continue to objectify them.
Yeah, it's tough for me. I think there's two layers, because I want to validate these things just as much as I want to question them. So I'm gonna go the questioning route first.
I like your questions.
The questioning route is, have you ever met someone who has all of the skills you just described, and you find out that they're like a manipulator? Because I've met those people where they have all the ability to listen and ask questions and say those lines that, like, I think we need to say, but they have all of that. And then deep down, their motive is something malicious. And you don't find out till down the road, because you looked at the externals and thought that showed a truly loving person. And I think that points to the need for the spiritual realm, the need for something, for someone who I believe is Christ outside of ourselves. But that's the side, the pushback side. The affirming side is, when you do love, when you are in pursuit of him, you do care about learning the exact skills you're describing. And that's where it's worth, talking about them and describing them. Like, so I want to say, in themselves, there still seems to be something more to be uncovered and to grow towards in ourselves, something bigger that's missing. But at the same time, if you have that, or at least are in pursuit of it, kind of the thing I was getting at earlier, if you're in pursuit of it, you definitely care about knowing those skills and acquiring them and going, oh, I should do this. I didn't realize I should do this for this person I want to love, but I should do it. So there's definitely a both and to it. Kind of like someone can be a doctor because they make money and they heal and they practice medicine because they make money, and someone can be a doctor because they actually love. But if you love, you will want to see people get medical help. So, I think that's where there's this value in absolutely in identifying these communication skills and looking in someone's eyes and asking about them. But I know one of the people I'm thinking of, who's not a malicious person, but who was an objectifying, attached person. They went and watched, because the other person in their relationship was unhappy with them, they went and watched a bunch of videos on all of these skills. And they would have conversations with this person with, well, tell me how you're feeling. How do you? And they would do the skill of repeating back to them what they said. They did every single skill. And the other person at first was like, oh, I like these changes. And then down the road, they still could feel that something was missing. And it was interesting because what they eventually had to do, this was several years back, but eventually what they had to do was tap into the life of prayer. And tap into, they were neglecting going to, this is an Orthodox couple, but they were actually going to services less because there was so much stress from this relationship. And there was so much stress in it. They weren't praying as much. They weren't going to church as much. They weren't going to confession. And that was actually what started to heal their relationship, was that they stopped seeing all of their ability to learn all of these skills and heal the relationship. But like I said, the inverse is also important. If you are truly moving towards them and you're tapping into Christ, etc., you care about all these tools. You care if you increase, like, okay, I'm going to go to church. I'm going to ask God for help. I'm going to stop looking to me as the savior. You still want to learn these skills. And that's why they're so valuable to talk about. Even in my model, they're so valuable.
No, that's a really good point. I'm wondering if it works to bring in a gospel story. I'm thinking the rich young ruler. I'm thinking I need to learn to talk. Thinking the rich young ruler. For those who don't know the story, so there's a story. Jesus is teaching. There's this guy that comes up. He's rich. He's young. He's a ruler. And per his report, he's been following all of the commandments, doing all of the right skills. But even he has a sense, but there's still something missing in my life. What's that missing piece? And then Jesus tells him, okay, well, sell all you have, come follow me. There could, say a lot about what that shift represents. But he can't do it because it means letting go of control, or letting go of resources, or letting go of something, and fully trusting. But I'm wondering if that is a good depiction of what you're talking about, which I think is a really true thing. In the IFS world, we sometimes talk about like manager parts in general as the ones that kind of like run our lives, and then we talk about the self. That's the clinical term for this inner observer that's calm and curious and compassionate and has the healing potential. And ideally, we speak to people from self. Ideally, we speak to our own parts from self, from within the image of God, from within the inner stillness. But we recognize the presence of self-like parts. These manager parts that know all of the right things, they do the right skills, but there's still something just off. And I think you're so right to notice that. With the example you're talking about with that couple, I can imagine. I shouldn't say too much because I don't actually know them, but I can imagine someone in the speaker's position, still wanting to control things, even maybe with a more beneficial intent, but still trying to manage things, still trying to produce things. Then there's still agenda. I want to get a certain response out of this person. I want to get a certain response out of the relationship. And that agenda, that pressure often is the difference. And you're right. Like the person receiving that, if they're paying attention, they'll be able to notice the difference there. So, I really love your idea of and like clinically, we'd say like unblending from that part, coming more into the gentle, the curious, the non-agenda itself. And, spiritually speaking, like entering more into the inner stillness in a life of prayer, using a prayer rule, using, entering into like the sacramental space of the church to have your whole person, your whole soul be saved, be soothed. That is a really necessary move, because I mean, we step into the church, we're stepping out of control. No, that's not what I want to say. We're yielding up our ultimate authority over ourselves, and yielding that to God. We're stepping into a trusting, contingent role. We are the beings that are created by the uncreated, and then there's always a built-in hierarchy dependence in that role. And when we can lean into that, we can thrive. When we try to resist that and try to act as if we are our own creators, our own saviors, like you were saying at the beginning, that's where we begin to be imbalanced in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I remember this was something that really formative to some of my opinions on this, just for me personally. I ran into several years back a evangelical counselor, and he overheard me talking to someone, and he started up a conversation, and he was talking about like, yeah, I do biblical counseling. And I was very interested, like, oh, I'm curious what his model is, because, I have my like very like, some of it is most evangelicals would find acceptable, and some of it is uniquely Orthodox. So I was asking him, I was like, well, what do you do? Like if you run into someone who has this or that going on? And as he explained it, it was like, if you're doing this wrong, the Bible says you're supposed to do this. And if you're doing this wrong, the Bible says to do that. And what I noticed was none of his answers were that only Christ could do it. Like, it was Christ. It wasn't, it was, and even prayer was just like asking God for help, but it wasn't that he was to some degree the actual answer. And I think this is what is happening on every layer of our spiritual warfare, from the macro, like the politics level, where ultimately only God can heal this world. Like, there's a level which we care about order and what's right, and we have political systems, but there's some degree in which only God himself being present is the answer to things. And it's the same on that micro scale of me personally. Like, we really want that so badly. That's like, well, I can label what it would be that would fix everything. And in reality, we're labeling things that play a role for sure. But at some point, there's no level of communication skill, of curiosity, of trying hard enough to do something that is enough to fix everything. And to some degree, that stuff is important, like incredibly important. Anyone who loves will talk about the skills and the deeds and the ways of thinking and living that will add to love. But there's always some point at which it all comes back to, there has to be something divine. There has to be something that's not already present in me that I seek out and call and am in relationship with. And that is what fleshes out and gives life to all the skills of curiosity and conversation. And so it's so much of a both and.
Yeah. There's a thing I'm thinking, hearing and agreeing with what you're saying, that at some point we just need to trust the divine. And there are some things that are out of our hands, and some situations where, what you said. I'm thinking about a scenario where there's someone who, had a history of, a series of wrongs toward their partner, and now wanted to make amends and do right. And there was this really distinct anxious energy around it. Am I doing it right? Should I do this or not? Am I sharing too much? Am I confessing too much? Is this more for me? Is this more for the other person? And as we're talking, I'm looking back on that and wondering if, to use some spiritual language, if it was actually a form of idolatry understood in the sense of looking to something other than God to save me, and then trying to control that thing. And in this case, the idol being the skill. We talked about some skills earlier. They're great things. Like good communication skills, the skill of a good apology, the skill of right brain attunement, really good, really vital. Everybody should do it. But even so, if I look to that skill or my capacity to practice that skill as the thing that will save me, then I made an idol out of it. And then I need to control it because now I'm dependent on that thing that's not meant to be dependent on in that way. And there's going to be an anxiety there. Am I tuning right? Am I doing it enough? Am I doing it in the wrong way? What's my real motivation? So now looking back to that situation, if I were to offer a piece of advice to someone, okay, so if you're out there and you're thinking, I need to make amends with this person, and I'm questioning my motives, that's a really good thing that you're questioning. That's probably a good sign that maybe your motives are not yet fully where they need to be, but that you're questioning is probably a good thing because it means you're in process. And all of these things are meant to be done as a practice, repetitively in an ongoing way. So if you're questioning your motives on why you're wanting to apologize, make amends with this person, possibly you have a deep down motive to seek security, to seek to control the situation, to seek to control the other person. If so, that's a really great thing to recognize. That's a thing to bring into awareness, to bring to repentance. Doesn't mean don't move forward necessarily, and doesn't mean you're doing bad skills, but that is a really important distinction to make. Like, am I looking to my own skill set as a thing that will save me and save the relationship, or am I practicing these skills as a way of participating in a greater tradition, in a way of participating in the greater healing work of God, and in a way of not controlling my own experience, but like you're saying, Thaddeus, to make a sacrifice of myself on behalf of this other person, to bring out the beauty and the well-being of their person. So then for the person looking for what's the right amends making skill and practice, I'm going to say, well, it's an attitude shift. I kind of, I mean, it's a little bit reductionistic, but it's much more a shifting of heart intent and heart state. And that's not something you can just like flick on and off. You kind of have to grow into it.
Yeah. Because in my experience, I've said to many a client who's come to me, I've said, if you're working on your heart state, other things seem to come naturally. If you, for example, when we fall and we don't know like what the purpose of this life is for, which is to come into communion with Christ. When we fall, we what purpose could there be if I just keep failing and failing and failing and failing? But if you know that this life is for coming into communion with him, not just doing things like he says or trying to be more sincere, like that kind of heart motive, but literally communion with the actual person, not ideas about the person or trying to be just like them. Those are key ingredients too, but to actually know him, then he tends to actually be very pleased to reveal what else should be done in a situation. And it's kind of like, I was thinking of, you can have all these conversations about how to play an instrument. It's like, well, I can tell I'm unhappy because I don't hear the music and I want to hear the music. And so, well, when you play the instrument, you got to hold it like this and you do this with your hands and don't overthink this and, trust that the wood is strong enough. You don't have to be afraid that you're going to break it or something. Like a violin is strong enough, and we're having all this conversation. But there's no violin. Like, you can talk about techniques all day, but Christ is the violin. Like, he is the instrument that love comes out of. And so that's why at some point, in my practice, obviously, like this could be broader clinical applications than what I'm shooting for in my practice. But at some point, my belief is that fundamentally every human being needs to actually have the violin for there to be music. And there's no technique. There's nothing that will be enough, even though those things matter. But I noticed that in my own life and in the life of a lot of people I know, that ultimately, no matter how many techniques and methods, et cetera, we learn, there has to be the violin. Like, there has to be Christ. He is the source of music.
Or there has to be this embodied experience. Like, I can't do these things in a theoretical vacuum. I have to actually be with Christ. I have to actually be with people. I have to actually try out this amends thing, make some mistakes, and then learn it that way.
Yeah. And this is the heart of why orthodoxy is so insistent that the Orthodox Church itself is so important, is because it's not like a methodology, even though there's methodology that's part of it, praxis, but it is the actual presence physically and spiritually of God himself in a way. Like God was in the Old Testament temple, and even though he was present everywhere, there was a way he was in the temple that he wasn't in other places. And there was holy ground, which implied there was not holy ground. Like there are places where he is and is not. And so everything begins, for my perspective, of him actually being present, and that everything is the pursuit of that. And every failure we have can be something that humbles us so that we seek him more. And in that sense, there are no true failures. Like, yeah, there's a way in which you say, oh, this was a mistake, this was a failure. But if you turn it to repentance, if you say, oh, this is such a reminder that I can't do it on my own. All these methods I do, as good as they are and as much as I need to keep pursuing them, this failure to do those methods, this fact that the person still doesn't feel love for me, these are all reminders, and they push me back to him. They push me back to more than just the motions. They push me back to seeking the actual instrument. They push me back to more than just the methods and techniques which matter, but they push me back to the source, where if you don't have him, you can do this with a cup all day, but you have to actually have water. So it has to be, he's the real water that waters our soul in the deepest sense and waters love within us. So
yeah, I really appreciate that thought. And the other last thing I'm noticing, because the original like discussion question I brought was like, what does it mean to do to make amends as a practice, not just this one-time thing or this once in a while thing, but to have it be part of the way of life. And I think what we've been circling around is that there's an attitude, there's a mindset, there's a phronema to a really compassion-based, humility-based, Christ-seeking way of like repairing relationships. And this phrase you said a few times of, either having the right intent or being in pursuit of the right intent, that in pursuit of, I think, is really the answer. If I'm in pursuit of something, that means I have to keep trying or keep at it or have a sustained effort in that direction. And I think that's the practice, is hopefully I'm in relationships long term and will have the value of, I want to be able to, in all humility, be present with this person in a healing way. I have to pursue that. I have to keep trying it. And so in that way, yeah, amends becomes much more than just this thing you do in inpatient, or this thing you do once a year at Forgiveness Vespers, or this thing once in a while when you go through the steps. It becomes, no, this is my way of life. This is something that comes into all of my conversations, and I'm always trying to get better at it. So I guess that's the practice component of it.
Yeah, because Elder Thaddeus, my patron, one of the quotes he says that I love is, he says, God doesn't ask you to forgive others just for their sake, but for your own. There's something about, like you were saying, that in pursuit of, there's something that's a key ingredient of the very concept of being in pursuit of love that comes from forgiving others. So forgiving others has to be about them. But of course, like we were talking about, if we're not there, then it's more of an issue of being at least in pursuit of. And I think that's where we see the other half of forgiveness, like Elder Thaddeus was said, that it's just like, if we want to love and we don't have it yet, then the mere act of being in pursuit of love, part of how that is done is to seek forgiveness. So to make amends and to seek forgiveness is not just something that you would do this if you actually loved, but if you find that you don't have love yet and you want to, or you want to grow in love, it is also a method of acquiring love. And in that sense, the control isn't that bad, as long as you're controlling with the goal to actually acquire love and to not be, it's skipping a step. It's, I want to feel this in the relationship. Well, the natural order God has is this way of working with him and with the other person and forgiveness, etc. But we kind of want to skip that. I'm just going to skip right to making the relationship be what I want it to be. And so the act of forgiving is saying, no, I'm not going to try and control this and be bitter and let this go out of control. I'm going to actually take the right steps to go through the order that's right. And that actually, if it's done in pursuit of love, with the self-honesty that we're not perfect yet, it is absolutely part of the path to get there. So amends is a salvific act in a way. It is something that is healing. It's like a salve.
Yes, very much so. So yes, that is our idea for the day. Something we're thinking about. We're still practicing it and inviting you into that practice with us as well, to be more present with yourself and with others on the road to salvation. So thank you, Thaddeus, for being with me today to share some ideas, and thank you, listener, for tracking with us. Again, pardon the slight technical glitch. I know there's a little bit of a lag on the video, but I think the sound quality was good. So if you're listening on audio, this is moot anyway. But for those of you who are following the podcast and value this sort of conversation, this sort of dialogue, please do join our community. You can visit us at patreon.com/outercircle and join our community for a few dollars a month. And that will help us get better technology that doesn't glitch and things like that. And Thaddeus, say again, where can people find you or learn more about the Rose Council?
My website is thaddeusthought.com, and there's a little tab at the top that says coaching. So if you want to learn more about what I do, there's information on that page, pricing, structures, whatnot. And then there's a contact me page. Whether you want coaching or you just want to chat with me, ask me a question, that's totally fine. So send me a message through there. And I presume that Rose Council will be linked directly on the front page of my website when it's up. But the website will be rosecouncil.com. And so feel free to look for that. I'm also on a lot of social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I highly recommend my YouTube channel just because that's where I put in a lot of work and it doesn't cost you anything. So if you look me up, Thaddeus Patrick, Thaddeus Creative on any of those platforms, I'm sure I'll be posting about any updates on the Rose Council.
Cool. Well, thank you for that. And yes, everyone stay tuned for the Rose Council. I know I will. I might want to participate because that would be really cool. And yeah, thank you again for being with us. We'll be back hopefully next week with some more thoughts, some more questions, and we will talk to you soon.